Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Might have some sort of trickle in as we go. I know these sessions run, I think, right up to the hour. But today, Chantal and I are presenting on procrastination in academic writing. Our presentation is Right On, Pushing Past Procrastination in Academic Writing. We'll introduce ourselves in a moment, but before we get started, I would like to recognize and acknowledge that where we are right now in the city of Hamilton at McMaster University, we, students, faculty, and staff meet, learn, teach, and work on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, an agreement to peaceably care and share for the resources and land around the Great Lakes. And I'll pass it over to Chantal really quick to give a breakdown of what we're going to cover today.
Yeah, wonderful. So today we're going to go over some procrastination habits, why they're so hard to get rid of, why it happens to all of us. Then we're going to go through what we're calling 4 procrastination challenges. And these are kind of the common challenges and themes that we see students and all of us that we deal with, and kind of some strategies to how we can overcome those. And then we'll have some quotes, some conversation and reflection at the end. Okay. To introduce ourselves, so my name is Chantalle Byrne. I am a transition program coordinator at the Student Success Center at McMaster University. Prior to working here in the Student Success Center, I also did my master's and my Bachelor of Arts in political science here at McMaster University. So I had a lot of writing and also a lot of procrastination in my undergrad and my grad school. But right now, currently in my role as a transition program coordinator, I am providing academic support for undergraduate students, which includes meeting with students one-on-one and hosting workshops and programs such as this. We also thought it would be fun to start off with our own personal worst procrastination habit. So mine is often, this happens to me and it manifests in many different ways, is that I will put off a task that I think is going to take me either a long time or just too much time, when in reality it will take me 5 minutes. Sometimes this manifests in seeing an email chain that I think is going to be complicated, but oftentimes it's also when I'm at home and I see the dishes and I think, oh, that's going to take me an hour to do the dishes, and then it's 6-7 minutes of my day. So yeah, I'll pass it over to you, Ben, to introduce yourself.
Thanks. My name is Ben Taylor. In the same unit as Chantal here at McMaster. My title is Academic Skills Program Coordinator, and I oversee undergraduate and graduate writing support at McMaster. So we have one-on-one appointments, we have yearly programs. I did my PhD in English at York University, so I know the struggles of writing very well and procrastination that comes along with it. And my worst procrastination habit, which Chantal and I found interesting, was kind of the opposite. I tend to underestimate how long something will take me, and then I don't learn from my mistake also. So we'll talk a little bit about, trying to implement some strategies to make sure you don't kind of continue this cycle of procrastination. But yeah, I tend to think like, oh, that's not going to take me very long, so I'll just keep putting it off and putting it off. And then when I finally get around to it, it's like, I probably should have started this earlier. It's not a good thing. We don't have too many in attendance right now, but I wanted to start off with a little like a fun poll. And then I'm going to ask you all what your worst procrastination habit is as well. But let me launch this poll. So we came up with 5 categories of, the levels of procrastinator. And we were wondering which level of these would describe you best. So are you a novice noodler? Do you occasionally put things off? A deadline dancer, work best under pressure, but somehow finish in time? Are you the tomorrow specialist? You'll definitely start tomorrow is your motto. Are you an elite excuse engineer? Can you perfectly produce remarkably creative reasons why now isn't the perfect time? Or have you elevated procrastination to an art form? So while people are taking part in that poll, I would also invite you in the chat to let us know what your worst procrastination habit is. I think with these kinds of sessions and conversations, the first step is really kind of acknowledging and reflecting on, where do we need to improve, or what really bothers us about our habits. So anyone want to volunteer, as Chantal and I did? What is your worst procrastination habit? It doesn't have to do with writing, just anything. And I think I've got all the answers to that poll, so I'll end that as well. So most of you are novice, about half, and then we have one deadline dancer and one master of delay, which is impressive. Anyone want to share their worst procrastination habit? I'll give you a minute or so. So household chores, Jenna says, yeah. Well, feel free to continue sharing. I'm going to jump into the next slide just so we maintain time. Um, Talking a little bit about why we procrastinate, because I think understanding, not necessarily at like a deep scientific level, but just a little bit about like what causes procrastination, and dispelling some of the myths around procrastination. The first of which is that most procrastination is really not a symptom of laziness. And oftentimes serial procrastinators, people who procrastinate over and over again, are often perfectionists because they are sort of waiting for that perfect time, trying to perfect the work that they're producing, and so they will put things off because of that. So the typical procrastination timeline involves, first of all, being faced with a task. So let's say, from Jenna's example, household chores. These tasks will usually take time and dedicated focus. And immediately some negative emotions might emerge from thoughts about that task. And Chantal kind of alluded to this earlier with the email chain, right? Like, whether it's, worry or anxiety around getting involved in this complicated issue with an email chain, just not wanting to do the task, lack of confidence if it's something new. So those negative emotions then will lead you to freeze and retreat from the task. That's kind of a natural response to anything that we're afraid of or that we have anxiety around. This negative cycle of stress ensues, often with a stronger inclination to procrastinate, right? You want to put these things off because of all these negative emotions. Overwhelming stress, though, and eventually this looming deadline will push you to complete the task at the last minute, right? And I'm sure we've all experienced this. Last minute, you complete the task. That was kind of my bad habit, is that I underestimate how long it takes me to do something. And so I am kind of pushing up to the deadline. And what is ironic here is that the feeling of relief you get when you finally complete that task can actually act as positive reinforcement, which is something that we want to change. So the strategies we're going to give you today will hopefully combat that. Because what happens is you do this task at the last minute and you feel this overwhelming sense of relief, right? Oh, I finally got that done. It's off my plate. Your brain actually associates that as a good thing. And so you'll continue to do that procrastination cycle because of that. So I'll pass it to Chantal to talk a little bit about those fears or the kind of negative emotions.
Yeah, so we kind of want to take it back to, the part of the cycle of the negative cycle of stress and anxiety that happens with procrastination. But with that, of course, there's those negative emotions and those feelings that we're having. And there's something, again, as Ben said, it's not just us being lazy or doing something wrong. There's usually one or multiple negative feelings that has a root cause of why we're avoiding something. So when I meet with students and sometimes we identify and meet with students one-on-one to talk about academics, and a lot of times there will be an identification that procrastination is an issue that they're having. One of the first things I like to do with students is kind of go over, okay, like, what is it that we're avoiding? And the reason why we want to get to that root cause is because oftentimes if you can be able to acknowledge and identify and really accept, okay, this is why I'm procrastinating this task. Oftentimes there is either like a very tangible step or solution that you can take to overcome that, or a way through to be able to work through the negative feelings that you're having. So some of these, again, this is, of course, there might be other reasons why, but these are a lot of the reasons that we hear from students, and that research shows why we procrastinate. So the first one might be anxiety stemming from perfectionism. You might be really having a very high standard for yourself, and if you feel like you won't be able to get to that standard or get the grade that you're wanting for or really hoping for, sometimes, again, that can be the feeling and the cause of us kind of wanting to flee from that. We might have a fear of failure. That might be anxiety rooted in, maybe you had an assignment, maybe this is the second assignment in the semester and you didn't do well on the first assignment. And so you have that fear of like, okay, am I going to do poorly again? Maybe it's a really tough class and you're just in general worried about failure. And of course, failure can mean many different things. A lot of times, sometimes you might have a worry that the effort won't be rewarded. You might feel like, well, what's the point if I put all of this effort and I put hours and hours into this task and I'm still not going to get the grade that I feel I should be getting or that I really want to be getting. Again, that can cause us to flee and run from the task. Sometimes we might have a reluctance to seek support or ask for help, and this might, again, be rooted in fear. Of course, asking for help is a very vulnerable thing for us to do. So sometimes you might be in a position of knowing, okay, I don't know exactly what the next steps are for this assignment or for this task. I know I need to ask for help, but sometimes it can be really scary to do that. You might have a fear of loss of reputation. You might have also going along with this kind of that issue of comparison with social comparison. I know in certain programs too, it can be a really big thing to kind of know, what the average in the class is or kind of knowing what your friends' grades are. And sometimes that can be really scary to think, okay, on the last assignment, I only got a 60 when everyone around me got in the 80s or the 90s. So sometimes, again, that can cause that fear and anxiety, and procrastination can ensue after that. I think potentially one of the biggest ones, and something that I think happens to all of us at a certain point, I would imagine, with our writing tasks especially, is a sense of boredom when we're doing the task. Just obviously, especially with writing, there's a lot of long, monotonous, it's an iterative process that takes a really long time, and that can just be straight up boring, especially, if you're doing a research paper and you have 20 journal articles that you have to go through and find what works well. That can just unfortunately be a little bit boring. So again, of course, naturally, your brain and your mind is going to think, I would rather be doing something even just remotely a little bit more interesting. For me, this used to manifest in, I was kind of a messy person in university, but somehow if I had an assignment to do that I felt was so boring, somehow cleaning felt like the more interesting task that I could be doing. So I was a procrastinating cleaner in my day. You might also have a resentment of the task. So this could be maybe you're resentful of the length of the task and think that it's too much being asked of you. Maybe you're resentful of when the professor is asking for it to be due. So those feelings can cause you to think, okay, I don't want to do this task right now. You might have a difficulty knowing where or how to start, which can kind of connect back to needing to ask for help or support. And you might just have frustration with the task in general. It might be annoying, difficult, all of those negative feelings that, again, you'd rather be doing something else. And again, the reason why we want you to kind of identify this and hopefully be able to figure out, okay, am I feeling one or multiple of these feelings and reasons why I'm procrastinating? Again, coming back to the potential solutions, if you have a reluctance to seek support or ask for help, being able to work through that emotion, or maybe you start small, maybe you go to the TA first instead of the professor. Sense of boredom, maybe there's something that you can do to make it a little bit less boring or something a little bit more interesting. All of these things that can have a potential solution. So that's why we like to identify that. But I will pass it back to Ben.
Yeah, so how do we push past procrastination? That's kind of the only way we can put it, right? Is that you do have to push past this. It's something that is inevitable. So if procrastination is a learned and reinforced behavior, as I mentioned, with the positive reinforcement you might get from the relief of finally doing the task. If we can change our habits, if we can change the way we approach writing and different kinds of work, we can resist the control that procrastination has over us. We can do this first through leveraging neuroplasticity, right? That a lot of you are probably fairly young, probably younger than Chantalle and I'm guessing. Your brains are still a bit more plastic than ours, a bit more, have a bit more plasticity than ours. And even ours do. Like your brain still has neuroplasticity throughout your life, but try to establish those habits. Trying to establish those habits early on is really, really important. Because you can sort of help your brain to kind of rewire a bit and have a better approach to the work you're doing. You might want to consider a practice of self-reflection and mindfulness meditation. We're not going to really talk about this a ton today. I will mention it in terms of like reflective writing, but mindfulness meditation, self-reflection has been linked to a greater attention span, which also can lead to less procrastination. And I have a couple studies there you can check out if you're interested in that. But we bolded what we're really going to focus on in the next few slides, which is implementing practical strategies to avoid procrastination from a more sort of academic skills side of things, like a sort of general academic approach, and then from a practical kind of writing standpoint as well. What techniques can you employ? What can you do to help improve your writing? And help you get past that feeling of procrastination. Kind of, one of the examples Chantal just mentioned is like, can you make it more enjoyable for yourself? It's not, we don't always get to do our, the kinds of writing we want to do at university, but you can sort of implement certain practices. You can reward yourself, and so we'll talk about that a bit, of ways that you can maybe make this a little bit less boring and avoid that procrastination. So 4 procrastination challenges. We'll start with number 1. I'll pass this off to Chantalle.
Yeah. So the first challenge that I'm guessing some of us at least have dealt with, reading this, I'm just brought back to many assignments in university that I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But the first challenge is the assignment is too complicated. I'm overwhelmed and don't know where to start. So again, I'm curious, I know we have a few people here, but I'm curious if anyone has ever had this feeling, and if you've had any strategies that you've used to overcome before we kind of get into some of our strategies. But does this seem familiar to anybody? While we wait for some responses, Ben, I'm curious, does this resonate at all?
Yeah, it does. Especially with big writing tasks, right? Like I meet with a lot of students who just want to go in every single direction possible. And you can't, right? You get an assignment, and especially like when you get more towards like 3rd, 4th year graduate studies, your assignments are more open-ended. You're given a lot more agency. Oh, and Yagma has a really good approach to this. I think making a list of things you need to do to complete the task. That's excellent. But yeah, I think as you get more like higher in your studies, you have more agency and kind of control over your writing, which with great, power comes great responsibility, right? Like you now have to sort of make the decisions of what you want to write about. And it can be very overwhelming, and it definitely has for me led to procrastination. Like I can't figure out what I want to write about, so I will pick it up tomorrow. And so what can we do about this?
Yes. So again, I know this is going to be a running theme throughout our presentation, but the first thing from an academic skills perspective, and this doesn't just, of course, have to be with writing, this can be anything related to your academic skills. If you feel like something is really complicated and you're not sure exactly what your first steps need to be, the first one that, of course, I tell everyone is talking to your professor or your TA or both. And again, I know this comes back to that feeling of, the vulnerability that you have to go to a professor and to go to a TA or both, one or both of those people for a class. I know it can be a little bit intimidating or a lot intimidating depending on who your professor is. And it's very vulnerable to go to somebody and say, again, kind of openly saying, I don't understand exactly what's happening, or this is complicated, or I'm not, sure what I'm exactly doing with this writing assignment. It's very vulnerable and it's very scary to do that. But again, I always implore students that it will result in things getting better. Often 99% of the time, your professor or your TA are going to be very nice. They're going to have practical steps for you to move forward. They're going to be maybe be able to explain more in depth about what it is from the assignment that they're expecting. Because, sometimes they make assignment guidelines and they think it's completely clear. And then oftentimes, there might be a bunch of students saying, okay, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking here. So when you go to them, there can be a lot of clarity that can come out of that. But again, I know it can be intimidating, especially if you're thinking of going to a professor's office hours. And of course, with professors, TAs, there are different avenues that you can take to talk to them and seek help. You can email them, you can go to their office hours, you can go up to them at the beginning or the end of class or a tutorial. Again, I know it's intimidating, especially if you've never gone to office hours. My favorite story that happened to me in undergrad, I had a professor that seemed like the most intimidating person in the world, and I went to his office hours terrified. And within 30 seconds of sitting down, he was like offering me pop and half of his sandwich because he was like, it's the lunch hour. You must be hungry while you're sitting with me. And again, it just completely broke the ice and just reminded me that, sometimes you have these professors standing at a lectern at the front of a lecture hall, and it can feel very like, oh my gosh, this is this intimidating person. But sometimes it's nice when you go to office hours and you're reminded, okay, this is still just a regular human being in front of me. So yeah, I like to tell students that when they get a little bit scared or vulnerable when they're asking for help. But another thing too, if you're not sure where to start, and I think this relates to what Yagma put in the chat, but breaking down the assignment into smaller components can really help too. If you feel like this is a little bit overwhelming and complicated, kind of breaking that down can have it feel a little bit less overwhelming, and sometimes it can make it a little bit more clear if you kind of write down like, okay, what would potentially be the first step here or the second step. And this could also go really well after you talk to a professor or TA, maybe have a little bit more clarity, and then taking that further and breaking it down. And also just making sure that you're establishing a realistic schedule and a timeline for yourself. If you feel like this is a really big assignment or it's really complicated, just kind of set things out in scheduling, which we'll get to in our slides further as well. But just making sure that you're realistic about what you can get done and what timeline you can get it done in.
Yeah, and on the writing side of things, these kind of parallel what Chantal was just talking about. I encourage students to reword the assignment instructions in their own language to make sure they understand the task. And this might, indicate to you whether you do need to go talk to the professor or TA. Look for keywords in the assignments you get, especially writing assignments. Your professors will ask you to describe things, summarize, argue, analyze, synthesize, evaluate, compare, and contrast. These are all very different tasks. So you need to make sure that what you're writing is doing is what the assignment is asking you to do. The last thing you want to do is write a summary when you've been asked to write an analysis. They're two very different things. Batch writing can be very effective, and I'll talk about this kind of throughout the slides. So rather than trying to write an assignment in a linear fashion, like, the worst example I can give is sitting down at midnight and writing an entire essay in 1 hour. Instead of trying to go like that start to finish method, try to complete similar parts in individual working sessions. So let's say you decide, like, I'm going to write out all of my topic sentences for each of my paragraphs in one working session. This will help you. One, you'll be doing kind of the same work, so your brain is thinking in terms of topic sentences, but it'll also tell you whether you have a logical structure to your essay or not. You might want to save tedious editing tasks to the end as well. So get through all of the major writing and the structuring and formatting, and then save all of that editing to the very end. And I'll talk about this a little as well when we focus on minimizing distractions later. And then finally, along the lines of that realistic schedule and timeline, with your writing, you want to make sure you have a good outline or a good plan. And this can be simple or as complex as it needs to be, because it just depends on the kind of writing assignment. But you need something to give you some kind of reassurance that you have a kind of direction going into the assignment. You know where you're going. You're not just kind of going word by word by word, because you're not going to have like a cohesive piece of writing like that. And it helps you from session to session as well, right? Say you only get a paragraph done, you sit down 2 days later. If you don't have an outline, it's really hard to start back up. If you play video games, you could use that analogy as well. If you put a game away for a long time, sometimes you'll come to it and you won't know what you were doing the last time, or maybe you stopped watching a show. You could relate to this, like you started a show and you watched 3 episodes and then you started it back up 6 months later. Sometimes it's very hard to like pick that back up. It's the same thing with writing. Like you may forget in a couple days what was the train of thought I was working on here. If you have an outline, you'll avoid that. So the next challenge we have is about scheduling. So my schedule is too hectic and I just can't find the time. I cannot find the time to work on the assignment. So I'll pause there for a second too and ask, does anybody relate to this? Which seems like kind of an obvious question. I'm sure that all of these challenges really, but yeah, Jenna does relate for sure. Too hectic, can't find the time. Yes, okay. let's leave it at that. So I'll turn it back over to Chantal to talk about some ways you can, use your academic skills to approach this.
Yes, and obviously I think we all relate to this.
Hmm.
Of course, especially when you're if you are a full-time student or even a part-time student, your schedule can feel extremely hectic. So some of the skills I try to teach students are, practical tips to get through this. The first one is taking time to schedule your scheduling, which funny enough, I recommended this to a student recently and they said, I don't have time to do that. And I said, you need to make the time to do this. But it's just basically taking time. Sometimes I recommend towards the end of the week and thinking ahead to the next week, maybe like a Saturday night or a Sunday night if you're kind of getting ready for what your next week or two is going to look like. But it's just literally actually taking time to carve out time to set aside your schedule and kind of, do whatever you need to do, whether that be time blocking, or, having everything on a calendar, what you have going on in terms of your classes and especially with your writing. Okay, like when do I want to get started on the writing? What part of the process do I want to do at what time and what days? So again, taking that time to actually think through and make the schedule can be really good. And that can, of course, look like different things. That could be making a calendar, that could be making a to-do list, that could be just writing everything out, maybe on, a physical piece of paper. It could be using OneNote or Notion or whatever you prefer to use for scheduling. But again, I think that's a really important kind of first step, to kind of just, again, give yourself either however long you need, maybe half an hour, maybe it's an hour to kind of go through and have just everything laid out, especially, we come back to breaking down the assignment and making sure you have all those steps ready for you and you know what you're going to be doing. And again, coming back to using a weekly schedule and identifying that once you have the scheduling, being able to identify those chunks of free time. That can look like larger chunks of time that maybe you have, maybe you have a day off or you have half a day off or free from classes, and you want to use a larger chunk of time to get working on something. But one of my favorite things to do is, especially if you're someone who your schedule is genuinely extremely hectic, and oftentimes students can feel like, okay, where am I finding the time? I'll have students sometimes show me their calendar and it will basically look completely full with classes. But sometimes I like to let students know to utilize a term that I heard about a year ago, is utilizing what we call micro windows of time in your day. And this is essentially just taking those little maybe chunks of time that are maybe 10 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, that you have free time. Maybe say you have an hour gap between classes and you have about, say, like 45 minutes where you would maybe otherwise just kind of sit or talk to friends or go to the library and just kind of be on your phone, because sometimes I think we get into the mentality of, okay, well, I have to, make it a whole big thing if I'm going to be working on my assignment. And I have to, okay, I have to get my laptop out and have the whole thing, which is of course good to have that whole thing. But sometimes it's good also to just be able to utilize those little windows of time in your day, and just say, okay, I'm going to take 20 minutes right now. And I'm just going to look at one source that I need to look at, or I'm going to just read the assignment guidelines, and again, this can be extremely small windows of time in your day. Maybe you get to class and you have 5 minutes while the professor is setting up their slides and getting ready. And that can be, okay, I have a few minutes to do this and I can just kind of look at an assignment guideline for something. So again, I really encourage that for students, especially again, if you're finding that you just don't have those big gaps or those big chunks of time in your day, or you don't have as many as you would hope for, just kind of reframing your thinking about how you're utilizing your time. And again, what you can get done too, that you don't always have to be, okay, I want to get a whole draft out in the next few hours. That sometimes it can just be a small task. And then of course, with your scheduling and with your time management, the big thing too is focusing on prioritizing your obligations and prioritizing what needs to get done. I like to think of this as thinking about, okay, what do I have to get done? What should be getting done? And what would be nice to get done if I have the extra time? So to kind of think through, and I think we all naturally prioritize our tasks in our day-to-day life, but just thinking about it more intentionally about, okay, what is the actual things that have to be getting done and what could potentially be put off, or what's something that would not be of consequence if you don't get it done. I think can sometimes be really helpful, because I know this can be an issue too. I've talked with students who said, okay, I feel like I have 32 things on my to-do list and I feel like I should be getting it all done. And sometimes when they realize, okay, there's a few things on here that I could put off to next week, or maybe it's not completely necessary. Again, when they reframe their thinking about their tasks and their prioritization, it can help free up some of the time, and it can help them feel a little bit better and a little less daunting when they're looking at their to-do list. But I will pass it over to Ben for the writing side of things.
Yeah, and my first strategy really builds on that idea of prioritization. And it kind of goes back to the different assignment tasks that I mentioned earlier, right? Professors might be asking you to describe certain things, explain an event, analyze something. So different kinds of writing, I would say, require different depths of thinking. So you might want to rank the types of writing you need to do based on that depth of thinking. It can be useful to tackle writing tasks that require less critical thinking, things like describing, summary, when you begin an assignment, and then move to those writing tasks that require deeper thinking, the ones that tend to scare us away and cause us to procrastinate, right? Developing an argument, analyzing a situation, evaluating evidence. These are like the really deep critical thinking pieces for writing assignments that students tend to be very anxious about and kind of not know where to start. So maybe save those, don't put them off too long, but you could start with the easier things or the things that are not quite so critical or that require that deep thinking until you better understand your topic and your approach. So you might feel a little bit more confident if you do a little bit of summary, do a little bit of description first. A lot of this idea of prioritization, though, does have to do with creating this kind of balance between what I would call making time and finding time. So as Chantal mentioned, these micro windows, that's kind of like finding time to me. So you can make time sometimes, right? You can prioritize tasks, you can prioritize obligations to ensure that you are able to carve out, let's say, blocks of an hour, 2 hours, or even, yeah, like a half day if you can. But sometimes you just have to find the time, and it's those micro windows. Be strategic, be proactive about using breaks or gaps in your schedule. I put this in my notes as well, so I'm glad that Chantal mentioned it. Times when you might be scrolling TikTok or Instagram rather than refining your essay topic. Like, yeah, it's not the most enjoyable thing, but could you put your phone down for that 15 minutes and just you could create a list, bulleted list in 15 minutes that could get you just another step further towards writing your draft. So yeah, you're not going to get the whole essay done in 15 minutes, but how much could you get done to push you to that next stage? And I remember I mentioned batch writing on the previous slide, and so I think a lot of these strategies we're talking about today are interconnected. So if you've identified these different writing tasks, ones that maybe require a lot of deep thinking, ones that don't require quite as much critical thinking, you kind of need to determine how much time these will take, right? So once you've determined the different categories of tasks, you want to batch them appropriately and schedule appropriately. So I just gave you an example. You're not going to write a draft in 15 minutes, but maybe you can sketch a very, very rough outline of a single paragraph in 15 minutes. And then the next time you sit down to do it, your task will be a lot easier because you do have that plan. I usually give the advice to students, like if you don't know how long these things take you, start timing yourself. It seems like very obvious, but I don't think a lot of us do these things where like you actually time yourself. How long does it take you to write a paragraph? Um, Reading is a huge part of writing as well. So I encourage students as well to time themselves reading. What's your average speed for reading an academic article? You need to know these things so that you can plan accordingly. So challenge 3, I'll hand this to Chantal.
Yeah. Okay. This is very topical. I see and meet with students, I think, every day that talk about this. But too many things are distracting me. I can't focus on the task at hand. So again, we'll throw it to the chat, see, does anyone have this as an issue? I see articles, I see videos talking about this. Obviously, it's a very prevalent issue just in general, obviously, especially
Uh,
with the rise of short form media.
Yeah, I was just going to add to this if anyone has like, um, yeah, if you experience this, but then also like, what do you find distracts you the most? Like, I think the top might be social media, but if you want to throw that in the chat also while we're talking, just curious if, are there any other things that tend to distract people most?
Yeah, I'm curious, is it TikTok? My dog. Yeah, pets can be very distracting. They require our care and our attention. Actually, now that I think about it, my cats do distract me, even just by being cute. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to go pet them and be with them.
I don't think I have this on the next slide, but I was thinking, Chantal, one of the things that I have heard I run graduate writing intensive, students say is like they have to make sure they're like not hungry when they sit down to eat because it's very easy to
Yeah.
like when you have that sort of like hierarchy of needs, if you're hungry, like it's going to distract you and you're going to make an excuse to get up and go eat.
Yeah. It's funny because I look at a lot of research because again, I meet with students almost every day who talk about focus as an issue. And when I'm looking up research and articles, that's usually actually one of the top things they say. Like you have to make sure your basic needs are met and making sure that you're not hungry when you're trying to study. That's why they do recommend having some kind of like a snack that has, maybe healthier protein or something that can be good for you, but really anything. Research does show and articles will show that, yeah, having food around or just making sure that you're not hungry. Because again, that will be something, like you said, where you'll think, oh, well, I'm hungry. Or even if you're like, well, I kind of wish I had food. So sometimes having the food next to you eliminates that as something, well, I'm going to just go leave and focus on that instead. Um, yeah. Okay.
So I'll pop over to the next for you to.
Yeah. Okay, so again, focus and getting distracted. There's many things that could be distracting us. Um, we the first thing from an academic skills perspective is thinking about your devices. I've generalized this with just putting your device on do not disturb mode. But I do want to expand upon that there's many different ways that you could be distracted by your phone. Sometimes, obviously, I think social media is a really big one, but it might be social media, it might be Reddit, it might be Discord, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. There's a million different apps that it could be. It might even also just be your phone in general. Maybe you're just texting people. It doesn't even have to necessarily be social media. So there's lots of things on our phones that can be distracting. So do not disturb mode is kind of the easiest and most basic way of kind of trying to at least minimize the distraction of your phone, at least not seeing it light up with notifications. But sometimes you might need to take this a step further. You might need to literally like turn your phone off, or you might need to be putting your phone physically farther away from you, and turning it off, if you're feeling like it's a huge issue. As well too, think about as if you have a laptop, and I know sometimes if you have, say, an iPhone and you have a MacBook, there might be a connection between, you can still get text messages even if your phone's far away. So just making sure that if you're trying to put yourself on do not disturb mode, that you're thinking of all the devices that might be allowing those distractions to get through. There's also apps that you can install. I'm sure some of us have heard of, those the screen limiting apps that you can download, and you can put browser extensions on your laptop. But again, it's just obviously we know that the phone can be a really, really big distraction. So minimizing the distraction of your phone as much as possible, even for just a time, can be really good in helping with that. Also with focus, sometimes, and this is a big thing that I tell students a lot, and kind of leaning into how productive you can be for what period of time you can be productive within. So sometimes we recommend shortening your working sessions, and rewarding yourself with breaks. Obviously, the really big, well-known one is the Pomodoro method, which is where you typically take somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes of, kind of intense focus, and then you reward yourself with, say, a 5 to 10 minute break. Of course, you can customize that, individualize that to whatever works best for you. Maybe you want to do 45 minutes with a 15-minute break. But again, it's really important to make sure that you're leaning into taking breaks, and rewarding yourself, so that way you're not getting overwhelmed and you're not getting burnt out with trying to focus for too long, because then that's where you tend to say, okay, I can't even look at the screen of what I'm looking at anymore. And that's where the focus issues can really become exacerbated. Also, something can be nice to try listening to instrumental music, classical, video game soundtracks are really great, or white noise. I think there's brown noise. There's all these different kinds of things for music, or something that can just be something nice to listen to and can help you kind of focus, and it's not too disruptive to listen. The big one too is cultivating a productive space. I usually have like a series of questions that I'll ask students when we talk about studying, or when we talk about writing and getting, kind of getting down to doing their work. We talk about, okay, what time of the day do you like to get your work done? Are you able to, do you Do you get really tired in the afternoons? And is that when you're trying to get your writing done? And that's really not good for you. Maybe you need to go a little bit later at night, or maybe you need to go earlier in the morning. But also thinking through, because then again, that can help with your focus. But also thinking through, like, okay, what is your space looking like? Are you making sure that does it need to be completely clean for you to not get distracted by objects? Also thinking through where you're studying can be really important to, making sure your focus. Do you like to study in the library? And even going further than that, where do you like to study in the library? Do you like to be on the absolute, here at McMaster in our library, we have a silent floor on the top floor. So do you want to be on the completely silent floor? Do you want a little bit of ambience? So it's like a little bit of a quieter floor, but still some noise because that helps you with the noise around you. Or do you need a really like kind of active space? Do you like, again, is it the library as well? You can think through, is it a coffee shop? Do you work well at home, or do you find that you get distracted at home? You find that, okay, if I'm at home, I'm just going to go talk to my roommates or talk to my family, or I'm going to go again, make food. So if you find home distracting, make sure you get at least just out of the house and go somewhere else, a library, it could be a coffee shop, it could be anywhere. So yeah, just thinking through, where do you feel the most productive? When do you feel the most productive? And again, how do you feel productive with your workspace? And where you're working, when you're working, can be really important to help with, again, not feeling distracted. For me personally, I could never deal with a super, super loud atmosphere. Even a few months ago, me and my sister were trying to plan a trip, and we went to like a really loud coffee shop. And again, this was not a big thing. We just needed to again get some Google Docs and figure out flights. And even just like the coffee machine, we were both like, oh, I can't even focus on this. Like we just had to go back home and work on things so a more quiet space. So again, it can be really important for minimizing those distractions. And I will pass it back to Ben.
Yeah, focus is such a hard thing with writing because there's so many it's such like a kind of like stop and go process, right? Like you will be writing a sentence and you're very focused, and then you have to kind of sit and think. And your mind like does have to wander. It's just naturally like to get the writing done. And so it's kind of this balancing act again of like letting your mind wander, be creative, be critical with the work you're doing, but not wander in the sort of wrong ways. So I think getting a lot of writing or sort of words down on the page initially can be very helpful because it really does help you like focus on the task at hand. And there are a lot of different methods for getting words on the page. Free writing, I think, is one of the common ones we recommend. So you could pair this with something like the Pomodoro method. It'd be kind of a nice pairing where you can set a timer for, as Chantal mentioned, 15 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever. And just say, I am going to write without any editing, without sort of any judgment whatsoever for that many minutes, and just get the ideas down on the page. And so it's about like not editing, not worrying about grammar, syntax, etc. And even after you free write, when you are writing that first draft, I encourage students to try as hard as they can to avoid editing. And by editing, I mean fixing grammar, fixing syntax, tweaking sentences very slightly, finding the perfect word, formatting citations. Try to avoid all of that in that first draft. Like you can do that later. That can all be done later. You need to get the ideas down. You need to get the text down. And so, that editing piece can get in the way of the more important writing, and it can lead to what's known as, Chantal referred to this earlier, productive procrastination, right? Where you start doing these like tasks that feel productive, and they are kind of productive. Like you're editing, you're picking the perfect word, you're fixing your sentences, but your productivity with less important tasks or lower priorities is actually causing you to procrastinate in terms of the more important tasks or the higher priority. So it may feel great, like you clean your room up, like that feels fantastic. You were really productive, but what you actually did was you procrastinated and you put off something that was more a high priority. Writing, especially at the academic level, does require a lot of preparation. As I mentioned, reading, research, note-taking, outlining, all of these things go into that final product, right? There's a huge process that goes into it. So I encourage students to make sure you have what you need before you start that writing session, because it's very easy to get distracted if you are not prepared. It's easy to get distracted by, that feeling you might have that, oh, I need to read another article, or I need to review my notes one more time. So try to avoid that sort of feeling by getting all of that done ahead of time, making sure you are absolutely confident that you've taken all of your notes down, you've reviewed them, you've read all of the sources, you have them all ready, you've underlined, annotated. Do these things before you start writing, and you'll set yourself up for success with your writing. And you'll avoid being discouraged. You can get really discouraged if you sit down to write and you're prepared to, to grind out like 1,000 words, and you get like 10 words done. You get one sentence done because you realize I needed to read all these articles. It can be really discouraging, and that can, feed into that procrastination cycle. And similar to what Chantal mentioned about times that you're most productive, I think most productive, and then also when it's easiest for you to write. I actually learned a new word recently, crepuscular, which is where my writing productivity is. It just means the beginning of the day and the end of the day. So dawn and dusk, essentially. And fun fact, most dogs are crepuscular also. That's when they are most active. So they're not nocturnal, they're not diurnal, but they're crepuscular. So like a dog, I get most work. Like I'm very productive either first thing in the morning with my writing, or if I stay up very late and, like I'm kind of winding down, I can get a lot of work done. I think I just need that kind of quiet. The middle of the day sometimes feels too buzzy for my brain. So, similarly, maybe you write best on a full stomach. I don't know why this came up, but we were talking about food. It keeps coming up. So maybe you write best after lunch, right? Like you got a nice lunch, you're feeling like pumped to write. That might be your best time. You just need to figure these things out because it can have a really big impact on your productivity. And again, whether it feeds back into that cycle of procrastination or you're able to break free of it. So we're hitting our last challenge. We've got about 12-ish minutes left, so I think just enough time for this. Our last challenge is probably one of the hardest, I think, to deal with. I think the last three were very common. We have some practical strategies. This one is just as common, but I think is one of the most difficult, right? When you have that feeling of maybe imposter syndrome, what's the point? I'm probably gonna fail anyways. Why even bother? How many of you here have experienced this? I mean, I'll raise my hand like every day. I don't know, Chantal, how about you?
I mean, yes, obviously I've talked about this with many people, especially when I was in my first year of university, I quite literally, like, I did fail classes. So I think when I came back, I took a little bit of time off and came back. I think I really was sometimes getting into that mindset of like, well, I failed before, so like I'm probably gonna fail again. So yeah, that can be a very rough thought and feeling to have, but I think it's extremely common. Physics quiz physics quiz. Oh yeah, I talked to a lot of students who are taking physics right now. It's a little bit rough. The midterm is coming up. But yeah, okay. So again, like Ben said, this is very difficult, and I think some of these are a little bit more, I guess, I don't know, the word I'm thinking of is just abstract in terms of, ways forward and things that we recommend to do. And I think are just, not as straightforward as, okay, you're feeling distracted, put your phone on do not disturb mode, and boom, maybe your problem solved. I think this is can be a very complex, negative feeling that you're having. But some of the ways from just a general academic skills perspective, it might sound silly, but I think first and foremost is just acknowledging and letting yourself be aware that, okay, this is how I'm feeling. And again, coming back to what we said, getting to the root cause of maybe what's causing me to procrastinate and not want to do things. I think for this one especially, it's just really important to acknowledge and let yourself feel the feeling. And not feel bad that you're feeling that way. A lot of people do. But if you're able to, talk through those feelings with somebody, it might be your peers, it might be a family member or a roommate, or, maybe even potentially talking about it with a TA in office hours. It might be anyone that can be there for you. Or it could be academic coaching or meeting with an advisor or someone who can kind of just hear out those feelings. Can be really good to just get it out there and talk about it with someone. Two, I think this comes back to avoiding social comparison, because, especially if you've maybe done poorly in the past, or you're just really worried, when you think about how your peers are doing, if again, you see the class average, or how your friends are doing, or how other people are doing, and you feel like everyone else has it together and everyone else knows exactly what they're doing, especially, with writing, and they write amazing and they don't have any blocks and they understand exactly what the assignment is going to look like for them. So again, trying as much as possible to avoid that. I know I had this really, really bad when I was an undergrad. I had a friend who was wonderful, but she did not have to really do anything to write an A+ paper. Like, she just was that smart and she could do everything and she just was quicker with it. And again, not to say that I wasn't smart, but I think sometimes I got into my head of, okay, I'm not doing as good as her because I'm not going as fast with my writing and I'm not, picking up things. So when you can kind of get your head out of that mindset, it can be a little bit better. Of course, being willing, and this kind of comes around with like having a growth mindset, but being willing to reassess and adjust when you're encountering obstacles with your writing, is especially helpful to kind of help you push past this negative feeling. And again, the theme of the day, I feel like, is seeking support. So again, whether from your peers or your professors or your TAs, again, that could be office hours, it could be, again, working on the assignment with somebody, going through it. I won't get into writing advisors because I know Ben's going to talk about that, but other supports that you can have. Again, it's not, obviously, I don't think this is something that gets solved overnight or just one of these, but all of these things hopefully together can make it a little bit better with that feeling. And I'll pass it to Ben.
Yeah, from a writing perspective, I think we often get so fixated on the fact that even the title of this presentation is about academic writing, right? We're trying to support you with your academic writing, but you may want to consider maintaining a writing practice that isn't just academic. Writing is very powerful, it's very personal, and reflective writing and journaling can help cultivate that mindfulness I mentioned earlier. It could help unlock writing potential you have that you didn't even know you had, because you're kind of putting yourself in a different context, right? Like, if you're constantly finding yourself really frustrated with academic writing, you're not alone, one, but two, you can, try these other kinds of writing that may help you find your voice that then kind of builds your confidence towards academic writing, which is it's not a natural form of writing. So, people do think, as Chantal mentioned, had a friend who was just really good at it. Like, most people it does not come natural for. So there's, these are exceptions. It's something you have to learn, and you learn often through reading. But yeah, I do think maintaining a writing practice other than something academic, whether it is journaling, reflective writing, writing fiction, writing poetry, the more you practice, the better you'll get. And I think, again, practicing in different contexts can be really powerful because it can help build your confidence that it's not just, it's not just me that can't write academically. Like, this is actually something very difficult for a lot of people and takes a lot of work. Similarly, a writing group can help keep you motivated. It can also serve as a source of accountability. So if you have even one friend, like, see if your friend would be willing to start meeting regularly to just write. And you can write in silence just next to each other. Like, that's all it takes, because writing is very much a solitary activity. You do it by yourself typically, unless you're, doing some kind of like special activity. But, being around others can make it feel a lot less isolating. It can make it feel less lonely, which can be a positive emotional and mental boost, which can then lead to more productivity and less of those negative emotions that cause procrastination. And the fear of failure, I think, can be exacerbated when we set overly ambitious and unrealistic goals for every writing session. So my third tip here is just to make sure that you set realistic goals. Make sure you give yourself credit for making just even the littlest bit of progress each time you sit down. And make sure you classify your goals as well, or kind of categorize them. I always tell students that we usually because of the way assignments work, word count is usually the goal for most students. It's like, I need to hit this many words. But that's not always the best goal to have. In a writing session, you can overcome like a block and only write 100 words, but that can be way more productive than sitting down and writing 800 words that are not good, let's say, for lack of a better way of putting it. So you have to understand that there are quantitative goals, word count, but there's also qualitative goals. Like, I got past this block, or I finally got to the root of the argument that I want to make. And last, make sure you make use of all the resources at your university, especially the Writing Center. These are folks that are trained to help you with writing. They're trained to help you communicate and express yourself as best as possible. They're not there to judge your writing or tell you you're a bad writer or, criticize your ideas. They're really there to help you get the most out of your writing. So please do make use of your Writing Centers. We just want to end today. We have 5 minutes. So if anyone has any thoughts they'd like to share or questions or comments, we figured we'd end with a couple quotes. So, on theme, we've got one that's a little bit more about sort of general skills approach, and then one that's very like writing focused. But I did notice, Chantalle, these are both authors, so kind of on brand for the writing thing. But I'll let you read yours to start.
Yeah, so again, we were trying to find something a little bit motivating. And when I was looking at a lot of thoughts and quotes and writing on procrastination, a lot of it was very intense of like, just basically don't procrastinate. So I like this one, but it's your life is happening right now. Don't let procrastination take over your life. Be brave and take risks. And I like that. I see being brave and taking risks as just, taking some strategies and just trying something new to try and combat the procrastination if you're anything like me, and it can be a really big issue for you, especially with writing and assignments. So just trying new things to hopefully get better with it.
Yeah, the quote I chose is from Louis L'Amour, and it is, "Start writing no matter what. The water does not flow until the faucet is on." So it's that idea of like everyone has to start somewhere, right? And so you can, procrastination will just put off the inevitable. So the quicker you can get started, even if it's with small steps, chunking things out, scheduling small portions of time to work on things, you'll get the flow going in the faucet, and then eventually you'll get, the full bucket or whatever metaphor, if you want to extend the metaphor to whatever. But you have to start somewhere, right? So yeah, we have 3 minutes, but I wanted to just thank everybody for coming and participating. We had a great time putting this together. But yeah, any questions or final thoughts on procrastination, or is there like one strategy that maybe everybody that anyone here has that they're gonna like take into their next assignment? Actually, I think Chantalle, I think we might have a poll.
Oh, yes.
I forgot to do that one. Yeah, so we'll ask you really quick here. There's quite a few options, but what's a strategy we discussed today that maybe you want to try using on your next big writing assignment? So conveniently, we did think of the end of this presentation with a poll. I almost forgot.
Almost forgot entirely. Let me just.
All right, we have one, breaking the assignment down. Two, one person says setting clear and realistic goals. Two people breaking the assignment down. Yeah, that's really powerful, I think. I don't know. That's like one of the I don't know, like most common pieces of advice I'm giving out to students about writing is like you can't do it in one sitting, essentially.
Yeah.
3 people. So we've got 3 breaking the assignment down and 1 setting clear goals. So I'll end and just share those results. Yeah, thanks again, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of Procrastination Awareness Week. A lot of great events.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Yagma. Glad you found it informative. Take care, everybody.
There.
Bye.